All right, welcome back, everybody. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent,
Here.
Clegg,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Thompson,
Here.
Woodings,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. Next up, we have item 2, request for approval of the council meeting minutes from December 8th.
Move approval of the council meeting minutes of December 8th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I have a motion to reorder our
Oh,
agenda
okay, great.
and also remove one of the consent agenda items.
All right.
So I move that we reorder Resolution 58620 to, after number 4 on special business FY 2020 end of year report, that we switch on special business the interim budget changes and end of year report in order, and that we remove resolution 60120 to a date to be determined, as there are some changes that need to be made to it.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right, I've marked my agenda. I will try to remember that we've swapped that order. Catch me if I move us into the wrong thing. Next up, we have the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on the items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the consent agenda with the changes noted in the prior motion.
Second.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just wanted to note for the record, I'll be abstaining from resolution 596-20. It's just an easement with Idaho Power, my place of employment.
All right, thank you, council member. We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
And next up, under ordinances, we have 2 ordinances on first reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on first reading be read by number and title only and filed for the second reading calendar.
Without objection?
ORD-52-20 and ordinance CAR 20-00005 South Point LLC for property located at 993 and 10151 West Victory Road, annexing 19.28 acres of certain lands and territories situated in Ada County, Idaho, adjacent and contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Boise City, establishing and determining the land use classification of said 19.28 acres as R-1B, single-family residential, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such annexation and zone change, directing the city engineer to lodge and file a legal description and map for said annexed land and territory, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Auditor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Assessor, and the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission, providing that a copy of said legal description and map of said annexed lands and territory be recorded with the Ada County Recorder and filed with the Ada County Assessor and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing an effective date. ORD 53-20, an ordinance amending Boise City Code Title 5, Chapter 2, Section 10, unlawful consumption of or possession of alcoholic beverages in public place. To strike subsection D, amending Boise City Code Title 3, Chapter 13, Article B, commercial transportation vehicles to add legal authority, purpose, scope, and general licensing provisions, applicable sections. To add and amend definitions, to amend license renewal provisions, to increase maximum insurance requirement, to provide specific restrictions on non-motorized commercial transportation vehicle licenses, to prohibit the transfer of all commercial transportation service licenses, to provide a measurement of sound, to provide for immediate suspension or revocation of a commercial transportation vehicle that does not conform with the vehicle inspection standards and requirements, to renumber the chapter sections, approving a summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Next up, we have one ordinance on second reading.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on second reading calendar be read by number and title only and filed for the third reading calendar.
Without objection?
ORD 51-20, an ordinance DRH 20-00434 for property located at 2115 Heights Drive, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property, particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance, from R-1CH, single-family residential with historic overlay, to R-1C, single-family residential without the historic overlay, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Thank you. We have nothing on third reading, so we'll move into special business. And first up is the ratification of the appointment by the Ada County Board of Commissioners to Julianne Donnelly Zool to the Boise City Ada County Housing Authority Board. I'm not sure, is Julianne with us today?
Guess not.
All right, I just want to thank her for her interest in serving in this role. And with that, it's properly before us.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we ratify the appointment by the Ada County Commissioners of Julianne Donnelly Zool to the Boise City Ada County Housing Authority Board of Directors.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And next, item number 2 are the revised findings for DRH 20-398.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. As you recall, on December 1st, you approved an appeal overturning a Historic Preservation Commission's denial for a proposal to construct a new home at 1521 North 5th Street. In short, council found the decision of the commission was arbitrary and did exceed their statutory authority. Included in your packet are findings and conditions reflecting this decision. They are essentially the same ones that were initially recommended by staff to the commission. We are asking that you adopt the findings today. Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I've reviewed the findings and the record at our hearing and agree that the findings do reflect the discussion we had that night. And with that, I would move approval of the findings for DRH 20-398, 1521 North 5th Street.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And now we're going to move into the revised number 3. So that's FY 2020 end of year report with Mike Chirac. I saw you there, Mike. Oh, Eric. Is it you, Eric?
There he is.
Oh, there's Mike. All right. Thank you. Go ahead. Mike, is it you that's presenting end of year?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor.
Thank you.
And Eric will be running the slides, and good afternoon, council members. In your packet, you should have received an electronic copy of the end of year report we finished recently. Next slide, Eric. has a picture of the cover. And if you're curious, understand that is Hobble Creek Park. And so today I will go through the general fund first, the results, and then also briefly the enterprise funds and the other funds, and then also the economic brief that is at the back of the report. And then Eric will go through end of year funding recommendations and interim budget changes.
Thank you. Thanks.
So before we show you a lot of numbers, we thought we would start with something that, a slide that doesn't have numbers aside from the year. And this is just some themes to give you a sense of what we see as we got through the report and what fiscal year 2020 ended up as, and as we look forward. So for the fiscal year, revenues were close to budget overall. We had shortfalls in parks and recreation user fees, a significant shortfall, and also parking related revenues were down. Those were a couple of the big shortages. We were surprised with sales tax being up and development fees were higher than anticipated. Construction continued through the pandemic. So in sum, we ended up very close to budget, just slightly under. Also, the local economy held up better than expected. Part of that, we think, is just the strong economy going into the pandemic and driving around town. Currently, you will see hiring signs out there. So that, we believe, has helped us. Also, the federal stimulus back in the spring that lasted through the summer and some still continues, that provided significant support far and wide and reduced the economic damage. There were payments to taxpayers, there were enhanced and extended unemployment benefits, there were loans to businesses. Again, that prevented a lot of economic damage. The other theme out there is with the city, revenues are close to budget, but we had significant expense savings. This was due to proactive cost management. We had less hiring activity, more vacancies, a hiring freeze, except for critical positions. We didn't hire as many seasonal and temporary employees, unfortunately. There also, we limited maintenance and operations expenses. We had closed facilities. So we had significant cost savings. We also did not need to rely on our contingency account funds. So that is something also that shows up in our accounts, cost savings. So we finished the year positive, better than we thought it would be. We just want to make the point that we still see future risk out there as far as balancing the budget goes. This could be COVID impacts. We're not sure if there will be long-term impacts, changes in the economy. We could have funding challenges, some of our revenues, and our expenses continue to increase. One thing on our to-do list for the January is to update our 5-year forecast. That will hopefully give us some insight into what we see for the coming years, starting with the 2022 budget year, and then looking out from there. And so kind of in sum, where we see things too with the economy is there's certainly optimism now with the vaccine, which is very significant. There's also a question right now about stimulus, whether there'll be more. And if there isn't stimulus, there's a question out there, we could have a double dip recession. And aside from that, there's certainly a lot of people out there who are suffering financially currently. So now we have some numbers. This is on page 8 of the end of your report. It is a key report. Sorry, it's kind of like an eye chart and there's a lot of numbers there. One thing we did this year was we shaded a couple things. One, just the 2020 column, so you can pick that out. And then the variances to budget over on the right side. And in reviewing the report, it's always helpful for like revenues. If you scan down the shaded column on the right, you can see some of the variances. Sales tax is the second one, and it was 1.4 million over budget, and so on. The other thing with revenues is we do have the governor's public safety grant initiative revenue booked in fiscal year 2020 due to accounting rules. It's really a fiscal year 2021 item, but that is in there. Going down to expenditures, again, in the blue shading, you will see personnel 6.3 million below budget. And then maintenance and operations, 15.7 million under budget. A lot of costs, particularly in M&O, do get rebudgeted, but there you can see the significant savings we had. Then moving down to the gray shading in the middle, you can see a couple of the year-end adjustments we have to do. We took out an unrealized gain on some fixed income investments, which is just a book gain given changes in interest rates. And then also we exclude the governor's public safety grant revenue because of timing. And then we have year-end adjustments. The available resources for the year, the unallocated resources, ended up being 14.2 million, higher than we expected. Eric will talk through the funding allocations that we propose, including budget workshop initiative, after I'm done. So this slide just hits a few of the high points on the revenues. Again, we were close to expectations, just slightly below budget, less than 1%. Parks user fees, we had a $2.9 million shortfall. Parking revenues, if we include parking fines, it was about 800,000. And then again, sales tax, 1.4 million above budget, a surprise how well that held up. And there's a lot of parts of the economy out there that are actually doing quite well, like recreational vehicles and such. We've talked to the State Tax Commission on how these numbers are so good. Also, development fees, construction continued. We did not have a high bar for a budget, but still it was good performance looking back at how construction continued and development fees came in above budget. Also, just a point of note is property tax was slightly above budget. We thought there might be a drop in tax payments as the economy ground to a halt in the spring. That really did not occur. And then there always are some prior year payments which come in. So that's how we end up slightly above budget. And then also just a note, the 27.9 million for the property tax reduction for fiscal year 2021, that is in the revenue. And when we look at revenues to do comparison, we took that out. And then moving on to expenses. Again, personnel nearly 4% below budget, 6.3 million. Again, hiring freeze, fewer seasonal and temporary employees. Maintenance and operations, 15.7 million, nearly 30% below budget. Again, proactive cost saving efforts citywide really brought this down. When we look at the 15.7 million, over 14 million is shown in the bullet points below there. Operating contingencies, 4.8 million. Contracted miscellaneous costs, 3.7 million. This is for a lot of projects and things which maybe we couldn't get to or we've rebudgeted, and some costs were just avoided this year. Professional services, 2.3 million below budget. And then if we combine minor equipment, travel and training, supplies and utilities, there's another 3.6 million. Also in miscellaneous expenses, they were nearly 4 million below budget. 2.3 million of this was due to the timing of VRT grant funds. A large portion of that will be rebudgeted, but that's what's going on there. And that brings us to the rebudget topic. We've got these savings, but again, a significant amount of savings are for things which will be moved forward to fiscal year 2021 as rebudgets, or were encumbered. We also had some revenues that get rebudgeted. So that is all mixed in there as well. If there aren't questions on the general fund, I will then proceed to briefly go through the enterprise funds.
Go ahead.
Okay. For the airport, as you know, the pandemic's had a severe impact on air travel. Fee revenue, which is in the departmental revenue category, was down 7.4 million, over 20%, and it was 8 million below last year. There was a pandemic-related grant which has helped offset some of that revenue loss and keep the airport so that their financials are not too far out of whack. Operating expenditures were also down 6.6 million, about 15%. 364,000 of that was in personnel, 3.5 million in maintenance and operations, and then 2.7 million in miscellaneous expense. Capital revenue was also down, driven by the pandemic limiting air travel. Just another impact to revenues for this year. And then, as you know, there was a lot of capital projects that were planned. The year had 87 million of budgeted capital projects. About 22 million was done. And basically just the pandemic and the very significant reduction in travel has caused a reevaluation of the planned projects. So as airport recovers, those will hopefully come back, but that may take some time. The geothermal fund, fee revenue for water sales was 144,000, nearly 20% under budget, and also 70,000 below last year. Driving factors here is a relatively warm winter as far as weather goes. There's also some evidence that the pandemic just lowered heating demand for downtown, fewer people around, buildings didn't have quite the heating demand if workers aren't here. Total operating costs were 10.5% below budget. Moving on to solid waste fund, departmental revenue for fees was slightly below budget, 838,000, about 2%. There's some sense the pandemic reduced demand or growth slightly there. Operating expenses, like we've seen elsewhere, were 89,000, just slightly under budget. For water renewal fund, the fee revenue there was 3.3% over budget, about 1.8 million. The budget did not reflect the 5% rate increase. So if it had been in there, you would have expected, or without that in there, you would expect more like a 5% increase versus 3.3%. It appears there is some softness in revenue and demand for services given the pandemic, and closed businesses, failed businesses, crop revenue was also down. That's what's driving that there, why it's not a higher increase. What was higher was capital revenue. It was 10.6 million, and that is due from development contributions and connection fees. That exceeded the budget significantly by 55%. And that is hard to predict when those development contributions and fees come in. Total operating expenditures, 53.7 million, were 1.1% below budget. This was due to maintenance and operations costs. Personnel costs was actually above budget. The enterprise funds had large or significant pension liability adjustments. These are non-cash expenses, but they do need to book the expense. And the one in the water renewal fund was 2.1 million. That drove personnel cost up. M&O expenditures were under budget by significantly more than that, due to savings, professional services, and a number of other categories. And then capital major equipment expenditures were short of budget. Much of that is for multi-year projects will be rebudgeted. The pandemic may have slowed down some of those projects as well. Moving on to housing funds, revenue was 50% of budget. There's a number of programs in these funds, and timing of federal grant reimbursements or when these projects start is what drives revenue here. Likely some slowdowns in projects there is the cause of that. Likewise, operating expenditures were under budget significantly. And again, there's just a variety of programs. So we see fluctuation in there. It's nothing too atypical for the housing funds when we look at them all together. Property management, rent revenue was below budget, 48,000. We had rental turnovers and vacancies a little higher than projected. And I believe we're still doing the renovations up on Vista. which is driving the vacancies as those units get rebuilt. Operating expenditures were below budget. We had reduced M&O costs. Just some things were delayed and costs were saved there as well. Fleet services revenue was $67,000, about 2% below budget due to the pandemic, reducing services by city departments for vehicles. Fewer city vehicles being driven, fewer miles, just reduces their workload. Operating expenditures were under budget 1%, and they also had a pension cost liability adjustment to book for fleet services, which drove up some personnel costs as an offset. Risk management and workers' comp revenue of $7.1 million was 2% above budget. Expenditures were $2.1 million under budget. This is due to the mid-year funding increase we did a year ago. $2 million of year-end funds went into workers' comp, and that raised the expense budget. So the claims are out there that we believe will bring in the expenses, just they have not come in yet. So expenditures came in under budget due to that reason. Costs are expected to continue to trend higher given new legislation, more and larger claims, and the higher self-insurance threshold. Every claim we have to pay costs the city more before the insurance kicks in. And then the last fund to cover here is the capital fund. Capital fund revenues were $32.5 million. It was $10 million less than budgeted. This is primarily due to timing of projects and impact fee transfers that comes in as revenue. $5 million is recommended for rebudget into fiscal year 2021. Likewise, capital expenses were $18 million below the budget, and that was $32.2 million below the budget. $24.6 million is recommended for rebudget into next year. So that is my quick run through the funds, and then I'll switch to the economic brief unless there are any questions. Okay. The economic brief is in the back of the packet of your electronic copy, page 64 to 74, and just a few highlights. Employment for September, the unemployment rate was 5.8%. That was up from a very low 2.1% a year ago. So unemployment is still high. We've had some recovery. I'll show you a graph in a minute. October came down a little bit. One thing to keep in mind with the employment numbers is just a lot of noise in there with different programs. And if you're on this program, are you technically employed or unemployed? So it will settle out, but we know we still have a good deal of unemployment. The labor force during the fiscal year grew by 4,500 workers, about a 3.4% increase, but there were fewer jobs if you look year to year, year end to year end. And then some economic sectors have recovered. Some are doing well. Some remain badly damaged. That's just what's going on out there. And with a vaccine, that should start to improve in other sectors, but that's going to probably take some time. And in the meantime, we've got unemployment and we've got some businesses which continue to struggle very much, and that affects a lot of people.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I have a question about the unemployment, the Idaho Department of Labor. I'm seeing from social media posts that something I feared would happen is starting to happen, and that is that the Department of Labor's fraud unit is starting to basically go after people who were possibly overpaid, or some sort of error may have happened in getting monies out to them. And it seems like they are now trying to recoup those funds. And as you mentioned, we're not yet out of the woods. And, you know, I speak from knowledge of what it's like to be in a situation like that, where there is confusion about whether or not someone is owed monies, and then putting them in the position to need legal resources to advocate for themselves. And, our people are suffering so much right now that to put that on them when we are just barely getting to the point where we may have access to vaccine, and who knows if everyone who has access to that medication will actually take it. I just want to know, what are we hearing in terms of, perhaps if the Department of Labor would hold off on their normal approach of going back and trying to recoup funds that may or may not have been given to the public erroneously, either through the individual's error or, quite frankly, the Department of Labor's error.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, I did see an article in the Idaho Statesman about that a day or two ago, where yes, it sounds like if you do not agree to pay back something for it's often the waiting week or something someone improperly claims benefits during that week, and then they discover it. And if you don't agree to a payment plan, then later on it will come out of tax refunds or other things. So yes, that does appear to be the case, that there are some people that got overpaid a little bit, and unfortunately that's what typically occurs there. I don't know much more about that. The other thing worth mentioning is that later this month, the extended federal unemployment benefits would expire without more stimulus to carry them forward. So another big lever there as far as helping people out who are in need right now.
Thank you. I'm very concerned about that and what the snowball effect of that is going to be with people. I mean, there were people who, from what I understand, still haven't received their benefits that they applied for back in the spring. And I just fear that our people are going to be in trouble, and that we need agencies like the Department of Labor to do better, quite honestly. Right now is not the time to be going after funds when our people desperately need them. And the reality is the Department of Labor does not record its phone calls with claimants. So whether the mistake is the claimants or the Department of Labor's is not clear. So I just want to voice that concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next point is the construction development from for the fiscal year from what's going on there. For the fiscal year, annual permit volume of 21,697 permits was down slightly, about 2% from the year before. Total development revenue decreased 6.4%, about $1 million. And while they're slightly lower, if you would ask me months ago, I would have said they could have been significantly lower than that. That's still actually a good year, and fiscal year 2019 was a record year as far as revenues go. So we do see a subdued level of construction development, but still things are continuing and moving forward, and it was a very active environment, very strong first quarter. So hopefully that will pick up as we get through the winter and get the vaccine out and move forward. Hopefully that will recover fully in short order. Sales tax, city sales tax receipts were up 4.1% over the fiscal year before. Again, that was kind of a surprise. It's worth noting state receipts were up even more. Some of this is due to online payers, which new online payers for another 4 years, their sales tax revenues go into a tax relief fund. They don't go into revenue sharing with cities and counties. Also, looking forward, new Idaho legislation as of July, we expect that will cap the city's sales tax growth at 1% this year, most of this year. It actually ends with the state's fiscal year. Each year, the state will take a look at sales tax per capita across different cities, look at an average. If you're above average, you get limited to 1% growth. If you're below average, you get higher growth. This is an effort to balance out sales tax on per capita basis across the state. And then the last point here, airport traffic, again, is way down. It has improved from a low in April. It remains far below prior years. For September, we're at 47% of the September before, September 2019. And I believe the next slide has a graph showing that. So there you can see the low in April, some recovery. It's kind of flattened out, but as the vaccine comes out, it's safe to travel again as we get into next year. Hopefully that will quickly come back up, but it may take years. The next slide shows the unemployment rate. You can show the economic shock which occurred in the spring and then a quick recovery. We're kind of moving along. Job growth is appeared to start to slow a little bit, so we're still moving around here and still have a ways to go before we have the vaccine out broadly. That would hopefully bring that down. And then, of course, there's just a stimulus question out there. That doesn't always affect the unemployment rate if it's just unemployment, but that also may affect hiring. And then this graph just shows the permit revenue. The green line off to the right, the high line was how strong the first quarter of 2020 was. And then the blue dotted line shows what we've been doing. It's been flat through the rest of fiscal year 20. But again, it was a pretty good year. It was just below what we have had in prior years. And again, we expect that will come back up once the economy is able to fully reopen. And I think that was it for my slides, and I will turn it over to Eric to go through the end of year funding recommendations.
Before Eric jumps in, I just want to say thank you, Mike, and also preemptively Eric, for the work that you and your team together have done this year. You know, this was a challenging year. It was challenging at in the early part of the year because we weren't sure, you know, what to expect with COVID, and we needed to make sure that we had resources set aside. We had new almost infrastructure that we had to prop up to meet community needs based on COVID. We needed to set aside funding for a reserve. And then all of this, of course, with an affordable housing need in this community, an affordability crisis that's only been exaggerated since COVID, that you helped us be able to address through property taxes and changing our budgets. And just as we go into budget changes and we look at where we ended up, I just want to acknowledge that it was the work that all of you did in consultation and in partnership with council that made it possible for us to be conservative in our budget settings, come up with funds that we needed to provide unexpected services to the residents, and now to take the unexpected funding results to cover some of those costs that we've been out because revenues weren't covered by CARES funding, and then to prepare for the future and to really address community needs. So just want to acknowledge the work that you've done and appreciate it as we start to talk about some of the changes that were the REIT budgets that are occurring.
Thank you, Mayor.
It looks like the council president might want to say something.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I will just echo the mayor's thanks to Mike and Eric and the whole team on working through these budget issues in such an unusual year. It's not unusual at this time of year for us to have a list of priorities that aren't completely fleshed out. So I appreciate all of the buckets, if you will, of funding for particular initiatives, and just want to clarify, not you already said it, but just want to reiterate, if you will, that City Council looks forward to working on the specifics of the initiatives, for instance, in housing, transportation, economic development, innovation, and performance and climate action. So I know that this next few months will be a busy time to try and figure out how to take advantage of the fact that we did have a little more revenue left to put towards some of these initiatives, and look forward to working on that.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, council member. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mike. I'm going to walk through the interim budget changes, and I'm going to start with items that would be brought forward on a regular monthly basis. These ones are unrelated to our end of year funding position. We have two interim budget changes. The first being a revenue neutral grant from the Idaho Department of Lands, which allows the city to address hazardous landfills and education efforts. And then the second item is for janitorial services. This item was discussed during the development of the fiscal year 21 budget. It didn't make it into the budget itself due to timing issues, but this is a cost savings item that will reduce the frequency of janitorial services at City Hall and at City Hall West through reduced dusting, sweeping, reduced frequency of trash removal within individual offices and cubicles. I'll also note that this item is really kind of the first phase of a larger approach to how janitorial services are provided at City Hall and City Hall West. Once we get through COVID, the idea is that we will move from a model where we have reduced frequency to maybe increasing the level of frequency for garbage collection, but it would occur in a different manner, meaning rather than having individual garbage and recycling at desks and cubicles and offices, it would go to a more centralized approach, which would, allow for feeding into some of our sustainability goals. So I'll now move into the end of year recommendations that are achievable because of the good management from staff, from our executive management team, from the mayor and council, and from some of those revenues that Mike outlined. So the first recommendation is to address some high priority major repairs and maintenance needs associated with our parks assets. Each year we strive to allocate as much as we can towards major repairs and maintenance activities. We've been increasing, the council has been increasing the level of funding available for those activities in recent years. This $4.7 million would allow for some very significant and meaningful repairs along the Greenbelt, along Shoreline, Wood Duck Island, and a few other priority areas. It would allow for repairs to the Boise Depot. This funding would allow for the remediation of some of the algae bloom issues and an ongoing remediation for those algae bloom issues at Esther Simplot and Quinn's Pond to hopefully make those assets available throughout the summer in perpetuity. And then various other needs, including parking lot resurfacing, various accessibility measures, the restroom replacement at Rhodes Skate Park, Eagle Rock Park, tree removal, hazardous tree removal, various other improvements. One of the things when it comes to parks, major repairs and maintenance, and really major repairs and maintenance altogether, is that it's very important that you address those things as needs are identified and you don't fall behind. To the degree that you fall behind and you're not proactively maintaining assets, it just becomes very, very costly. Repairs become worse, and it's a very difficult cycle to come out of. So it's a really positive development that we can allocate these funds here. Excuse me. The second recommendation is for the completion of two parks, Bowden Park, which is out in the Central Bench near South Pool and South Junior High, and then Molinar Park out in the Southwest. Both of these parks, Bowden was actually beyond the 10-year capital improvement plan. The master plan called for the establishment of a playground. This funding will allow for an accessible playground in that area that it's sorely needed. And then Molinar, that project has been funded over time. There's been some funding gaps associated with the playground structure and with the splash pad. That those funds have been allocated about 18 months ago. This funding would also allow for the completion of the walking paths out of that park. And then the remaining parks amenities, play like the basketball and tennis and skate park are funded in subsequent years of our capital improvement plan. Mike spoke a little bit about workers' compensation and rising costs associated with workers' comp claims. Allocating $2 million will help to stabilize that fund and also help reduce the rate of growth of contributions as we look into our forecast in future years from the general fund into the workers' compensation fund. These unallocated funding amounts will allow for us to address some projected revenue shortfalls in fiscal year 21. So Mike spoke about revenue shortfalls that were experienced in both parks and recreation and parking. We anticipate due to, I guess, the condition of COVID as we see it right now, we anticipate falling short absent these measures in both of these categories in fiscal year 21. There are a series of strategic initiatives, which Councilmember Clegg referenced a moment ago. We have staff available if there are any questions, but $3.3 million is allocated for housing innovation, transportation, economic development, innovation performance, climate action, leadership development, and community engagement. These are longstanding mayor and city council priorities that we are in a position to be able to make some advancements on. In some of these areas, there were plans that were established as part of the fiscal year 21 budget development process. Those plans in some areas are still in process, but these funds will allow action on those plans once the plans are fully developed. The last item I'll reference are a handful of other adjustments. There is some police equipment that is recommended, as well as funds for a rewrite of the police policy manual. There are funds allocated to advance efforts associated with internships, fellowships, and then onboarding of board and commission members. And after that, there is approximately just over $900,000 available to be transferred to our capital fund for future uses. We signaled as part of the fiscal year 21 process that there was a cost associated with case management software for our legal team. We're still kind of working through those costs, but we do anticipate bringing forward a interim budget change request that would utilize a portion of those funds later on this fiscal year. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions on any of the interim budget changes. And like I mentioned, we do have staff available before we go through the formal motions.
Madam Mayor,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of circle back on something that Eric had said and a bit of process that I think Council President Clegg alluded to earlier. So on the strategic initiatives piece, once the plans are produced, then any expenditures to implement the plans will then come back to City Council. Is that how I'm understanding it to work?
I thank you, Councilmember. For those plans, such as the economic development plan, and I think there's a couple of others, I think that they would come forward for specific action. Excuse me, it's for council approval.
Madam Mayor.
Sure.
I mean, one area of concern that I have is we have $500,000 to innovation and performance without any real specific measures or plans attached to it. So I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we see where the money goes. Part of what we do for the city is we make sure that taxpayer funds are spent appropriately. So I just want to make sure that there's proper oversight there.
Yeah, and the council president clarified that at the introduction of Eric's. That is the intention, that as staff works on deployment of these resources, they'll be working in partnership with in advance of deployment, and then of course coming back to council for oversight and approval.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. That was what I was trying to say, probably not very artfully. I guess, Eric, the other question, the 0.9 million to the capital fund, looks like there may be an expenditure looming for case management and legal. That too would come back to us. Is that correct? Before it was spent?
Yes.
Yeah. The capital fund is just a big fund, and actual expenditures out of it come back to us. I just want to clarify that for members of the public who may be watching. Sometimes I think it seems really opaque to people that what we're doing here. It's always good to make sure that people understand that this creates the opportunity, and then the opportunity is seen through later with another action.
All right, well, I think, Eric, great. I was wondering if there was a final slide with actions to guide us. Thanks for your report. Appreciate it. And you're welcome to address this.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess to conclude the end of year exercise, we'd be looking for approval on our end of year report, the interim budget changes, those associated with the unallocated funding from fiscal year 20 and otherwise, and all other interim budget changes as part of the actions earlier in the council meeting. The contingent appropriation use and the rebudget and encumbered items were approved.
All right, Madam Mayor, I think we can handle these first three, I hope, in one motion. I would move that we approve the end of year report and the associated interim budget changes for end of year unallocated funds and the other interim budget changes as included in the interim budget change report presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor, I move we approve resolution 58620 and 58720.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor, if
Yes.
I could, for the council members, especially Councilmember Bajent and Halliburton, who really haven't been through this process before, this is actually kind of the kickoff of next year's budget process, where we've now allocated the funds that we have left from this year, so that as we start the next year, we can begin looking at what opportunities or challenges are before us. And appreciate the level of detail that we got this year on knowing what some of those opportunities and challenges are. So thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just want to say, vocalize my appreciation for Councilmember Clegg and kind of helping guide some of the new council members through this process. Also, Councilmember Sanchez and I think, have the honor of sitting as liaisons for the Parks and Rec Commission. And I am really excited to see the different things that we hope to be able to do with this end of year funding, knowing that our parks are being more heavily used than they've ever been used before, and that there's certainly a need there. And the two of the items on there specifically have to do with keeping kids cool, whether that's the algae treatment or the splash pad at Molnar Park. And in a year where we may not be able to open our pools, I'm excited that we were able to get those two things on there. So thank you to everyone who was involved with this.
Thanks, Councilmember. All right, we've had Maria Week join us to discuss the next item business, which is the Boise Police Department survey results. I appreciate Maria being here. I've combed through a lot of the responses and I find them very, very interesting. And Maria's done even more combing to share with us what we've learned so far as we look to the next steps from a policy perspective and keeping our community safe. But before we do that, nobody can see him except for the three of us or the four of us that are back here. We've got Jim Schiffler, our downtown officer, that's here at City Hall today. Today is his last city council meeting as a member of the Boise Police Department. He will be retiring. And so that's why I was like wildly motioning that I wanted Jim to come in for a second, just so we can say thank you. Very, very, very much for your service. Truly appreciate it. For all of you that have worked or lived downtown, or for our team of people here at City Hall downtown, and of course council, and we've all gotten to know Jim over the years. It's your constant presence here. It'll be so strange to not see you on these days that we have council meetings, but just truly appreciate your service, the personality that you brought to it, and the community you've helped build downtown. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been lovely. So congratulations, though. You deserve it. Next chapter, better make it fun, because otherwise we'd like to have you here. So, okay, thank you. All right, Maria, if you'll jump in.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Can you all see the screen that I shared? I'm not as confident as Eric with the screen sharing, so.
I can see it.
And I feel like it's fitting to be here in front of you with these survey results on the day that Officer Schiffler is retiring. I first met him when he was at my former place of work doing an active shooter training. And while it was at both times a little alarming, I felt great comfort, like knowing that BPD had that training in place. You will remember that a couple of weeks ago, Chief Lee was in front of you talking about some potential policy changes that he and BPD are looking at. And we fielded a survey for the community right after that presentation. We kept it open for a couple of weeks with the goal of really hearing from the community about their thoughts, their concerns, their hopes, their desires, and getting some input on some of the specific policies that Chief Lee is thinking about and proposing. So I'm going to give you a very high level view of those survey results. We got about 250 pages of results, a lot of open-ended questions, which we did very intentionally so that the community could give us their feedback with their words and their experiences and their concerns and their thoughts. So it's a lot to read through. I will tell you that our respondents are incredibly, incredibly thoughtful. We did not get a lot of sound bites. We got a lot of really thoughtful, thought-provoking, interesting and important comments from the community. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in digging deeper, to read through some of those comments, because they're really terrific. Okay, so that being said, I'm gonna kind of bust through some of the demographics and the way that we did the community survey to give you a sense of it. We had 723 total responses. To give you some context, that's pretty good. That's about, we usually get about a third to a half as many responses when we put a community survey like this out. So of those 723 responses, 631 were Boise residents. So I've narrowed the data feedback that I'm giving to you just by Boise residents, but just know we did have like a total of 723. We had the survey open between November 17th and December 1st, and we advertised it through a bunch of different channels. We put out a press release. We asked the mayor, all of you, to put put it out on your social media accounts. We used several of our city social media accounts, our city BPD. I think it went out through the council account, through the mayor's social media account, through several personal accounts. We used our internal and external newsletters to push it out a couple of different times. We worked with community partners to make sure we got as deep into the community as we could. We encouraged our liaison officers to share it with the communities that they liaise to. We worked pretty hard to get it out into the community, and we're continuing to work to make sure that as we're putting our surveys out to the community, that we're getting them out as deeply as possible. We did, from the very beginning, produce both an English and a Spanish version of the survey from the get-go. So in terms of demographics, I'm going to go through what we got back from those 631 folks, and then give you a little bit of context about how it fits with the 2019 census data that we have for the city of Boise. So for age, under 24 and over 65 are a little bit underrepresented. The caveat with our under 24 is that we didn't ask school-age kids to fill out the survey. So it's probably not wildly underperforming, but when we try to compare it with census data, it can be a little tricky sometimes, apples to oranges. The one group that was overrepresented in terms of age was 35 to 54. The bulk of our respondents fell into that 35 to 54 age range. And you'll notice substantially women are overrepresented in this particular sample of those who chose to respond to the survey. In the city of Boise, we're more at like a 51-49 split, women and men, and you'll see by the results we were 56% female. And then we tracked non-binary, the census does not. So that's an extra data point. Race and ethnicity is a little trickier. We are going to get this dialed in with IPT and CE are working on a team to really think through the way we do these community surveys so we can make sure that we're getting back very, very consistent data and data that allows us to track next to like existing census tract data. So for this survey, we used what SurveyMonkey recommended, which is a little bit different than the census tract categories. That being said, when we look at the racial distribution of the survey and the racial distribution of the census data from 2019, we came really, really close. And members of our communities of color, the Black, African-American community, and multiracial community were very well represented in this sample. And the white community just like a tiny bit underrepresented, but not substantially enough, I think, to be statistically significant. The one place we did see a pretty substantial gap was in education. Respondents to this survey were very highly educated. We saw a much higher level of graduate school level education of respondents in this survey than we do in the community at large. So not entirely sure how to account for that, but just wanted to make sure to bring that to your attention, that the level of education was pretty high among respondents of this survey. So getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of it. The first question we asked was really simple. What does public safety mean to you? And by and large, overwhelmingly, respondents answered with some version of, you know, I just want to be able to live my life. I want to be able to walk around. I want to be able to take my kids to play. I want to be able to go to parks, enjoy everything there is to be about Boise, and not feel worried, not feel like I'm going to be the victim of a crime, not worry that I'm going to be harassed. And I want my neighbors to be able to do the same thing. I want everybody to be treated equitably. And I want to know that if something happens, there's someone that I can call for help. That was that sort of overwhelming theme that came from that. Now, there was a healthy dose of law and order mixed in. You know, we want to make sure the laws are like really strictly enforced. And substantially throughout the survey, not only in this question, but in like every other question that we asked, our respondents used it as an opportunity to talk to us about their desire to see stronger enforcement of traffic rules and regulations. There were a lot of comments about running red lights and speeding and not paying attention to stop signs, and a lot of call for enforcement around traffic. And we saw that kind of everywhere. Other thing to note is that there's a really broad view of what public safety means among our respondents. Not only did folks mention crime, like wanting to feel safe out in the community, they mentioned a whole host of other kinds of issues: public health, access to services, safe buildings, safe food to eat, like the whole gamut of what you might think about when you think about public safety. It was all across the board. Now, again, this is really high level, and I want to generalize because we do know that individuals experience this very differently. And may define some of these things very differently in the ways in which they're saying it. But it was very remarkable to see how many people answered it in really, really similar ways. I just want to be able to walk outside and do what I can with my kids and feel safe about it, and know that I'm not going to be bothered or harassed. And I hope my neighbors can do the same. So then we asked, how safe do you currently feel as a resident of Boise? And overwhelmingly, folks told us they feel very safe or somewhat safe. It's pretty positive numbers here. And I will make sure that you all have access to this slideshow as well. So I know we're going through it fairly quickly, but I'll make sure that you have access to it right after this presentation. The one question that I think caused us a little bit of concern, and that I'd like to do a little bit of a deeper dive into with our data team, is we asked, has your feeling of safety improved or declined in the past year? And we saw a substantial number of folks, almost 50%, saying declined. And so I think that's an area for us to pay just a little bit of attention to. It's across the board. We're going to look and see if that has any statistical significance with any of the demographic information that we've gathered from our respondents, but it's across the board enough that some of it may just be a result of this very unusual time that we're in and the breadth of which people think about public safety. But just know, I anticipate that was going to be something that you all were as curious about as we are. So I'm going to send that over to our data folks and see if we can dig in a little bit more deeply on that. We did ask, we did want to kind of find out what kind of interactions people had with BPD as they were thinking through this survey, and we allowed them to choose as many as they had. So this doesn't represent how often people in the community have had these experiences. We asked people to choose whichever they had. So you'll see traffic stops, major events are the biggest, health and welfare checks kind of down lower. Some people had none, and we did include a category of so we could know if folks were employed by or related to Boise Police Department officers. So then on policy updates, the chief had presented several different kind of policy updates that he's thinking about, and we asked folks to rank them. And then you'll see that they're presented to you sort of in the order in which they scored. So the system kind of takes all of that information together the way everybody ranks them and then assigns a score based on that algorithm. So far and above, you'll see that the responses that people scored, they'd like to see a focus on mental health, addiction, and homelessness. Lower, but I think still important, which is why we see Chief Lee presenting a need to look into these policies, are stopping the use of no-knock warrants and banning vascular holds, and then right in the middle, adding patrol officers. So just that's kind of how that shook out. We asked about crowd management, and I'm really glad that we did, since when we asked what kind of interactions folks had with BPD, attending a large event was such a substantial part of that. So one person said, and I thought this reflected what we saw through a lot of the comments. I'm unfamiliar with the current process because the question that we asked is that we said BPD has recently updated its crowd management practices. What should we keep in mind, or what kinds of things would you like to see us put into account? I'm unfamiliar with the current process, but hope that it allows for freedom of speech and prevents intimidation of individuals by potentially violent groups. So again, we know folks will have really different definitions of what a violent group is, very different definitions of intimidation, very different definitions of freedom of speech, but this was the major theme of how people responded, a high desire for freedom of speech in a safe way. And then underneath that, what came up over and over again was equal treatment during an event, so that if there are opposing sides to a particular large event, that they're treated equally by the police department. There was a desire for physical space in the event that there are different sides to an issue. They would like to see BPD respond quickly, de-escalate any hotspots that arise, and to do some of that in real time, to be able to address illegal activity that happens in large events in real time. And then one kind of caveat to this last one, I wanted to make sure to bring it to your attention because it came up so much in the answers to this question. And it is something that is not in the jurisdiction of the city of Boise, which makes it a little bit of a tricky wicket. But folks, a big theme throughout the answers to this question were people feeling uncomfortable with the presence of guns at big events like this. So with that caveat, not in the city of Boise's jurisdiction, but it came up so regularly, I wanted to make sure that I brought it to your attention. We asked also about recruitment, training, and leadership, and what would the community like to see the police department take into consideration in thinking about recruitment and thinking about leadership and training. It's broken into a couple of different categories. You'll see in recruitment, we heard a lot about diversity, making sure that the police department looks like the community, that we're reaching out to women, that we're reaching out to people of color, that we're reaching out to diverse life experience. A strong desire throughout the survey to think about mental health, both as we're recruiting and then throughout the time that, throughout the life of an officer, really paying attention not only to mental health issues in the community, but the mental health of our police officers. A strong theme of looking for experience, quality, ability, focusing on those things, emotional intelligence, and then education. There was a lot of feedback in the survey about looking for officers that had bachelor's degrees and above, higher levels of formal education. And I will let Chief Lee figure out how that all comes into a recruiting bubble together. Trust him certainly more than I trust myself to find police officers. And then in training and leadership, a lot of the things that we saw come up in the other questions. So a real focus on de-escalation, on how to handle mental health issues when they come into contact with that. Really strong emphasis on implicit bias training, transparency in the discipline process, and then increased staffing. I think increased staffing went hand in hand with traffic, with the need to see more enforcement around traffic type issues. We asked about some other policy updates, and the community came back with lots and lots of different ideas. Hard to kind of get down thematically, so I included some here. Again, a focus on mental health. A few folks suggested a special unit for mental health to think about mental health issues and deal with those in our community. Strong emphasis on enforcing the speed limit, enforcing red lights. A thread of bringing back the ombudsman, a process for feedback. There was a little bit I found kind of interesting, but several respondents talked about evaluating the black cars that BPD uses, the uniforms, the SUVs, they can be a little bit intimidating. So that was a thread that ran through a lot of the comments. Hiring more officers and increasing funding was a thread. Continuing the emphasis on and increasing the emphasis on community policing. And then in several ways, respondents brought up the idea of like, hey, should police officers have beats? Should we do kind of neighborhood policing again? Whatever happened to when officers were going 2 by 2 in cars and neighborhoods knew who their neighborhood police officer was? That was another thread that we found throughout this question pretty substantially. We did ask how folks felt about our COVID response. Now, I wanted to give you the sentiment response that SurveyMonkey develops. It's a little bit kitschy, but really represents well the response that we got from our respondents. And I imagine it matches what all of you are getting. I see a lot of what comes in through the mayor's email. I see a lot of what comes in through the council email, and it's really similar. Folks were across the board, enforcement, with a solid bunch on the other end of the spectrum saying, hey, let it just go. But generally, a pretty positive response to what the city of Boise has been doing to respond to COVID so far.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, council member.
those results were adjusted for Boise residents. Is that right? At the beginning of your presentation,
Yes.
You said that we excluded non-Boise residents.
Yes.
Thank you.
So it was a little risky, but we've been working on some dashboards in response to what you all in the community asked for earlier this summer, and Chief Lee has been encouraging since he arrived in July. They are in their infancy. We're just beginning with them, but we wanted to make sure that we were giving the community some real tangible things to weigh in on in this survey, that we weren't just asking a bunch of kind of fluffy questions. So we put the dashboards up and asked folks to give us their opinion on how user-friendly they were, what other kind of dashboards that they would like to see. The biggest piece of advice that we got, and that we know is kind of an issue and we're working with Kyle and IPT about, is just improving the mobile view. Our current dashboard software, I'm going to be way out over my skis and talking about like the background platform that like it's built on, but something about that makes it a little bit tricky for mobile consumption. So that's going to be something that we need to address. And then additional dashboards, ideas for dashboards that came up were traffic, use of force, additional demographics, and types of offense. But so far, they seem generally user-friendly. As we continue to develop those dashboards, we'll make sure that we're getting community feedback on it so that we're developing what the community will find useful and in ways that they can consume the information.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for the presentation. So in regards to the dashboards, is that going to be offered in multiple languages, or at least Spanish as well?
Yeah, we're going to work on it. We were trying to get that ready for this survey, and it just was like the platform that it gets built in and the way that the data is brought into it. We're going to have to do, I think, just a little bit more work on the back end, but that is 100% on our to-do list.
Okay, and so the demographics, is that going to be similar to what you showed us earlier? Is it going to include the racial and ethnic makeup, gender, all that jazz?
Yeah, I mean, let me get back to you as we continue to work through that, because I'm not the developer of the dashboards, so I want to make sure that I'm giving you the right information. I do know that we want to make sure that we're starting to use really consistent data that we can track against existing data, so that we have the best picture there.
Thank you.
And I think, council member, thank you for your really thoughtful question. I think in large part, folks also want to see how some of these with demographics, want to see how demographics interplay with types of offense, use of a force, traffic stops, and things like that. So we're going to want to make sure that we get that really right.
Thank you, Maria.
So with that, I would say any other questions? I do think we hopefully still have Chief Lee and/or Allison if you have any specific policy questions. I believe next steps, I'll make sure that you have the deck, and then if anyone wants to read the comments themselves. I know that Chief Lee is going to read through and digest all of the comments as well. And we'll send some of the dashboard information to the folks that are working on the dashboard, so everybody's really got a good sense of what the community is thinking. And then I believe Chief Lee will be incorporating the community feedback into further recommendations that he'll bring forward.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Maria, for that presentation. It's great to see that so many people decided to take part in the survey, because I know that sometimes it's really hard to get people to especially fill out surveys with open-ended questions. So I think that that's really valuable. My question is around the way that the responses are parsed out. If we receive the, kind of full response report from you, will we be able to see, I'm trying to ask this question in a way that makes sense, and it's kind of difficult. So say you have a respondent who is 54 years old and white. Will we be able to see what their responses were versus somebody who is 28 years old and Hispanic and what their responses were? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Council Pro Tem Woodings. We can talk a little bit more about that. I think what I would encourage, the way that the responses come in is such that they're anonymized. So we try not to track some of that. But I think what we can do is look for trends, particularly if there are kind of certain questions and certain trends we want to look for. With open-ended surveys, it's sort of a trade-off, right? So when we wanted to make sure we had a lot of open-ended surveys so the community could speak in their own words, and we weren't making assumptions ahead of time about the feedback we were going to get. It also makes then showing those relationships in the data much more labor-intensive and much more work, because a human being has to then go in and code the different words and code the different responses. When you do just questions where you ask people to do a data point, the software does all of that for you. So one thing that I might suggest, like I mentioned earlier, sending the information about people's feeling of safety declining to the data team. If there are particular questions that you all may have as you're looking through the slideshow or thinking through it that you want to send my way, I can follow up with our data team on that and see what we can get.
Great, thank you so much.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Maria. Great presentation and very enlightening, helpful. A few quick comments. Yeah, I was very interested in that list of open comments, like the darker vehicles. That's interesting. Those types of things that I certainly wouldn't have thought of would come out. So I look forward to seeing more of the comments that came in. And then to the question that Councilmember Woodings just had, it kind of ties into one of the things I was hoping, or hopefully we can get to, is it's very concerning to see, even though it's a small percentage, that 4 to 5%, maybe it was less, that feels very unsafe. And knowing who that population is and or demographics or something, I think is pretty vital to the police department. So that'd be great if there's anything we could get, the police department could get to do more, and maybe us from a policy perspective. And lastly, I just had those were just comments. The question: do you think the fact that 50% of folks feel, I don't know if it wasn't less safe, but less positive about the police department or something along those lines this year, do you think that ties into the national things that have been happening? I know we certainly have had some of our own protests, but do you think that ties into the national pulse, the Minneapolis's and things like that? Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. I don't want to speculate too much. We're in really unprecedented times, and in the previous question, community members defined public safety really, really broadly. In many cases, they defined it with indicators that included kind of crime and policing, and with indicators that talked about sort of health and welfare kinds of issues. So it could be a result of what we're seeing happen nationally. It could be a result of the fact that I think all of us are feeling a little less safe right now, generally because of the pandemic. So I think some of that just depends on how any individual respondent thinks about public safety as a general concept. So I want to be a little careful about extrapolating too much. Your point is very well taken. That is a question where I think we really want to dig in on that and see if there are relationships between any of the demographic information that we have about the folks who answered that way and that feeling of extreme unsafety in our community.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
I guess I got a question and maybe a comment. The question would be, and maybe you already answered this when you answered Pro Tem Wooding's question, is like, could we tell if there was a correlation between demographics and the feeling of safety in the survey results, or was that something that was able to be measured in that data?
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Halliburton. That I believe that we'll be able to get. I want to make sure that I can send a comprehensive list to our data team and send that to them, but that we should be able to get.
Perfect, thank you. And then I guess my comment would be seeing the need or the desire from the community for enforcement, maybe specifically with speeding and stop signs. I know our police chief is well aware of this coming from Portland, which I believe is a Vision Zero community, that our road and our street designs play such a major role in that part. And maybe there's some advantages to sharing some of this input with our partners at Ada County Highway Department as well, so that we know when we're talking about traffic enforcement, that we're really trying to build self-enforcing streets to lower the need, so that hopefully the most common interaction people have with police officers, the second highest one, isn't getting pulled over in their cars. And that's just a follow-up comment there.
Go ahead, Councilmember Bajent. We'll go Bajent then Sanchez.
Thank you. Maria, to follow up on a question, or I guess on your response to the Pro Tem's question about how difficult it is to suss out general feelings of unsafeness compared to maybe specific things, specific instances of unsafeness, compared to, I imagine, some respondents conflating questions about the police with questions about Boise Police Department, which I think there's good evidence that they can be different. I wonder what you think about the utility of doing this survey again next year, whether that would be useful to help clarify some of those things or good use of resources, or whether you think we've got what we need here.
Thank you, Councilmember Bajent. I mean, here's what I will say. The Office of Community Engagement, I mean, we're here as a service office, right? We, you all, the mayor, and the police department asked to see this kind of information from the community. And we enjoy asking the community for their opinions, for their thoughts, for their hopes, for their fears. So I would say if a year from now there's a desire to replicate this survey or put similar questions out to the community, we certainly could do that.
Okay, thank you. I'll put a pin in my brain to raise this in about a year.
Perfect.
It seems like it might be a good way to disentangle some of those issues if we can track these kinds of results over time, as opposed to, in a presidential election year with a global pandemic.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Maria, I just want to thank you so much for highlighting the wish and desire of our residents in Boise to disallow weapons in our city. I recognize that that's out of our hands, but I do think it's important that be raised up as a concern of our residents, because the fact is we are the capital city. We're not in a rural area, and to have folks for whom that is part of their culture, it's not really part of Boise's culture. I've lived here 30 years. And, it's been within the last several years that guns have become more prominent and evident as we go about our lives. And as we learned this summer, really are changing the culture of our city. And that is one aspect, feeling safe, feeling like you can enjoy your time out in our community and not be at risk of a gun discharging because somebody is ill-equipped to handle that serious responsibility. I really appreciate you pointing that out. And also that when it comes to issues of safety, that it's not just about whether or not we have weapons on our streets. It's also all the other different things that come into making a person feel like they can live a full life. And I imagine that would include having something as basic as access to healthy food and shelter. So I really appreciate you really pointing all of those things out. Moving forward, I hope that we will continue to do this type of community engagement, and perhaps we can refine it to make sure that we are reaching out to those communities who may not feel as much comfort in filling out a survey, but perhaps may embrace something a little bit more intimate. I do know the challenges that we had this year with the pandemic prevented that sort of engagement, but fingers crossed that the vaccine works and that we're able to engage in a more personal way moving forward. Perhaps we can embrace that more focus group type interaction so that we can get a more nuanced response to some of these questions. But thank you so much for this survey.
Thank you, council member. I would say with the exception of the 7 of you, the community engagement team is the chomping at the bit to get through COVID and get back to the ability to have some of those kinds of conversations face to face.
Great. Council President, I'll have you go, and then we need to wrap because we've got an executive session.
Okay, I'll be pretty quick. I just want to point out that I think we need to be careful not to conflate this survey with a scientific survey, which the city does do every couple of years. And I think some of you have expressed an interest in adding some beefed up public safety questions into that more scientific survey. At least I'm surmising that that's what I'm hearing somewhat. I would like to see the full printout of the results. I always learn something when I read those open-ended questions and the answers to them. I'd also, like the rest of the council, look forward to figuring out ways to look at reaching out to some of the folks who didn't respond. And certainly we've pointed out that some of those are in our minorities, people of color, but I think it's also clear to me that we have a lot of people living in this city who have a lower education attainment than what we saw on this survey that we need to hear from. And so I hope that as we do look forward to figuring out how to reach out to people, that we keep that in mind. I think most importantly that we now with this information begin to craft some potential solutions and start talking to people about some of those. I think we'll get some probably more detailed responses once people know what's on the table. I think this is a great way to start. Really, really appreciate the work, but just want to make sure that we don't expect too much from this, that we don't expect scientifically valid results, because that's not what this is. This is community engagement, and we probably need both. We do need both, but this is a great start. So thank you.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Maria, for presenting today. I think you've got a couple follow-ups just in terms of getting us and some of the members of the council some information, but really appreciate this work and your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members.
And with that, oh, wait, why did the chief just show up?
Oh, there he is.
Making me nervous. Were you there the whole time? I didn't realize that.
I was. I just bumped my keyboard and turned my camera on.
Okay. Well, welcome. We just wrapped up the presentation, so I guess you heard it. I didn't realize you joined us. I'm so glad you were able to. You've got a busy day today. But thanks for being here. With that, we're going to move into executive session with a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we go into executive session, personnel, land acquisition, records exempt from public disclosure, pending probable litigation, communication with risk management regarding pending probable claims, labor contract, Idaho Code 742061B, C, D, F, I, J.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thanks all.